I want to make sure that I've covered everything else before we get there. I do believe we have, so let us do it. 7/7, of course, is what we say in reference to the July the 7th, 2005 London terrorist attack, which happened on the London Underground network and a London bus. And it's there's going to be a lot today. You'll see a lot in the news. They'll be marking the anniversary, and there will be services of commemoration all around the UK. There is a big one in London taking place. And as I say, Charles isn't going, but Willie and his wife will be going. And no, I will refer to them absolutely like that, because I have no respect for these people, none whatsoever. And the idea that we should be calling them kings and princes and whatever is just obscene to me. And I literally will only do it if it enables me to be able to explain something to somebody. But pretty much people watching this will know who I'm talking about when I'm talking about Charlie and Willie. So let us talk about 7/7. It's powerful. It's really powerful what took place. So let me start bringing in some images. And I think this probably will immediately sum up a lot for many people. And of course, this is a horrendous event that took place, absolutely horrendous. And it killed 52 people, injured over 770 others. 3 of the blasts happened on the London Underground on or around 8:50 a.m. in the morning. And it was in the vicinity of Aldgate, Edgware Road and Russell Square stations. The 4th device exploded at approximately 9:47 a.m. on a bus that had been diverted via Tavistock Square. These are the men it is said to involve. These have become known as the 7/7 bombers. They are Hasib Hussein, Shehzad Tanweer, Jermaine Lindsay, and Mohammed Siddiqui Khan. And Netflix have produced a 4-part series to coincide with the anniversary. It's On first glance, it tells a compelling story, but for more discerning people like me, sooner or later you realize that what it is a very highly produced official narrative, but more than practically anything I've ever seen. And I'm going to shortly explain why. And I watched the whole thing, all 4 parts, in order to be able to review it and to compare and contrast it with alternative versions that exist, according to many people, including myself, by the way, we should say. And again, let me be absolutely clear here. I am not denying what took place. I am not denying that there were victims and that there were deaths. None of that I'm not denying at all. What I'm saying is that the official narrative, for anybody who's cared to look at it over the last 20 years, simply does not stand up to scrutiny. But before we get to that, let's look at what Netflix has to say and why I believe this is the most establishment version of the story I have ever seen. And let's just start with this man. This man appears in the documentary. He's Tony Blair. He was the Prime Minister from 1997 to 2007, so it covered that period. Interestingly, on the day of the terror attack, he was in Glen Eagles for the G8 conference with a number of other world leaders. And the Netflix documentary is called Attack on London, Hunting the 7/7 Bombers. Actually, I found it to be less than that and more about a lot to do with the aftermath of what was going on in London and actually hunting other bombers that were associated with attacks that followed 7/7. Primarily, only the first part is really focused on 7/7, but you then get bits, obviously, throughout the rest of the series. But by episode 3, I found it laborious and strained, and actually a fraction of the series, I think, actually covers 7/7. So I think the title on its own is a little bit misleading for starters. But what Netflix immediately does is what the British establishment did, and that was tell us that this was a threat from within, that young British-born males had turned on their own country, and this is a horrendous and compelling thought that we are seeing now fully played out, and how you have people like the people that we have previously discussed today who are taking advantage of this division. And there's only like I think two survivors who were featured in the entire series, which I thought was kind of odd. And the other person that made me think, well, this is just the most establishment of versions, is it also included this woman. And this woman was head of MI5, British Secret Services at the time, Eliza Manningham Buller. And what both Eliza and Tony Blair were saying was they had no intelligence on this. They didn't know this was going to happen. This was a shock for them. Right. This is what they were saying. And we'll come back to her shortly. But it was Blair and Bullingham that made me go, okay, this is a very establishment narrative, and it is glossy, and it is very well told, as Netflix do. Netflix produce beautiful productions, empty on content and actual fact, but beautiful visual productions. That is their speciality. Very much about what something looks like as opposed to what it is actually saying. So to go back to the survivors who featured, there was Danny Biddle, who lost his legs, and he recalled recognizing Mohammed Siddiqui Khan when he came into the tube carriage. And there was also Mustafa, who talked about how the police asked to search his bag, but no one else's. And he took that it was his name that triggered them, that he was a potential terrorist after 9/11. And then he appeared on ITV's breakfast show, ITV's ultimate propaganda show, which at the time was not Good Morning Britain. It was before Good Morning Britain, but it was still the same staff, including Kate Garraway. Kate Garraway, as many know, was front and center of the COVID narrative to do with her husband, absolutely pushing the COVID narrative. Kate Garraway is an establishment voice piece. Her husband, Derek, now sadly dead, was part of Tony Blair's New Labour. So if you bear in mind the people behind this when it was going on, and Mustafa, this guy, he appeared on the ITV breakfast show, and Kate Garraway essentially shamed this 20-year-old for being a Muslim. And afterwards, when he's like recording it, he's like, only the day before I had experienced absolute hell, and now all of a sudden I'm being grilled on TV for being a Muslim. And that, I think, is really key, because obviously 7/7 followed several years behind 9/11. Again, very much about a war on terror. And so Eliza Manningham Buller said that what, as far as she was concerned, was what we were dealing with was a series of crises in the tube in three places. And she said, we had no intelligence it was going to happen. She said there were too many people on our radar. Tony Blair echoed the same thing. And he said that he was notified around 9:30 a.m. in the morning, about 46 minutes after the attack started. I find that extraordinary, that the prime minister of the country is not aware for 46 minutes after after the attacks happened, but is not notified. I actually don't believe that. I just don't believe that. I simply don't. And Tony Blair is a mass murderer of people. Yes, he is, and he's never been held to account. And these are the realities, and it's awful. He said it's so awful. I'm going to quote him. It's so awful when people say you caused this terrorism, but you can't have policy governed by the reaction of people who go out and kill innocent people. I know you could literally be talking about yourself, though, couldn't you, Tony? You could be talking about yourself. And at the time, the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police was Sir Ian Blair, another dodgy bugger, dodgy as hell. Here he is at a press conference. And again, he repeated the same mantra that they were all trotting out. There is nothing to suggest intelligence has been missed in any way. And of course, what later came out was we then heard via the press that the guys had been on MI5's radar, had been featured in surveillance, and the narrative was that MI5 failed to keep an eye on them. That's what we were told. That is what we were told. We had images of them together. We had images of several of them doing some kind of training mission in Pakistan. And we were told they went out to Pakistan to train for jihad and weapons training and bomb making. But the question that has remained for many, many people is, were these guys actual terrorists, or were they the fall guys for a false flag event? Did these guys think they were part of a terrorist training exercise for the state, or did they truly intend to bring carnage to our capital city? We know there are so many discrepancies in the story, which I will tackle some of them shortly, including the time when they were all supposed to have boarded the train at Luton in the morning. We were told that the car that was found, that they claimed there were explosives in the car, but why were they there if not for future use? Or were these guys stitched up? Were they? I think these are questions that we need to ask, given that we know we are ruled by liars, by murderers, by genocidal maniacs. We can no longer afford to accept any official narrative that immediately deems Muslims as terrorists. We cannot afford to accept it at face value. And there is so much seriously wrong with this story. But nonetheless, let me continue on the Netflix version, because that is the version that the vast majority will be watching. The vast majority will not be looking at alternative versions by people like Dr. Nick Colostrum, but I will. Oh, yes, I will. And so let us just have a look into some of the details of these guys. First of all, Jermaine Lindsay, the only black guy amongst the bombers, was a convert to Islam. The other three were born into Islam. The other three came from up north. They were said to have frequented a bookshop that was involved in radicalizing them, and they were getting videos that were radicalizing them. And after the event happened, Hasib, first guy in this image, his brother rang police chief and said he'd found a phone with only one number on it, and it was a property that his brother was renting. He said it was, when the police went, they said it was full of bomb making equipment, including what they believed at the time to be excrement, but it made no sense as there were no flies around it. And it turned out, according to the police, to be a substance called piperin, which is derived from black peppercorns, and claimed that in this flat, this is where the devices had been constructed, and it was connected to the three men. There was also details of Jermaine Lindsay at the property. And I'm sure it will surprise absolutely none of you whatsoever for me to tell you that for almost all of these guys, their identities were found at the places they were said to have detonated bombs. So Jermaine Lindsay claimed his photo ID was found at the Russell Square attack. Again, the same with Hussein, and it, honestly, frankly, very, very dodgy, because such utter devastation that took place, carnage. I'll just bring in this image just to show you can see what happened on the tube and what happened on the bus. And yet somehow the people who are responsible, their identities seem to survive this attack. Well, where have we heard that before? 9/11, that's where we heard it before. And it is important to note that all of these men were considered men who contributed greatly to their community, despite what was being said about them in mainstream press by hacks. When their community were talking, they were like, these people were really helpful. Mohammed Siddiqui Khan was helping children who were struggling at school. He was a teaching assistant. There was a video of him, which they've used in the Netflix documentary, and I think it's interesting. So apparently he was saying, we are at war and I'm a soldier, and now you two will face the reality of this situation. Well, that's compelling. That's compelling. Watching that, I'm like, well, that's really interesting. So that has to be evidence that Mohammed Siddiqui Khan was involved. That has to be, unless it was fabricated, which, of course, the state wouldn't fabricate intelligence. Would it? Um, and also, I mean, it looks bad. It genuinely looks bad. He's looking off to the side. But he's not speaking his own words. They are scripted. He looks like he's hostage. Were those words said under duress? And what's also interesting is there is also an image, a video which they use in Netflix as well, of him with his child, where he's actually talking about how he has to go away to do this thing, and he has to, but he's going to miss the baby and mummy. That could actually mean that he was just going away to London on business. There's nothing in that video which is used to say that he was telling his own child that he was off to do jihad. There is nothing in that video to suggest what was happening. No, it isn't. If that is a devoted father, and by all accounts, he was a completely devoted father, when my daughter was little and when I had to go away or off on business, I would often sit down and say, Mummy doesn't really want to go away and I'm going to miss you. Those things are quite normal for doting parents. But it's been taken that actually what he was telling his child was, your dad is not coming back and I'm doing this for all of us. But that is not borne out by that video. It is not borne out by that video. Nonetheless, it is absolutely used for that purpose. And so what happened was these four were, we were told, the people who brought absolute carnage to the streets of London, and it was carnage. I don't need to remind you of what took place during that July 20 years ago, but it went on for weeks, and the aftermath of it was absolutely awful. Everyone was on edge. It was, we were told, a war on terror. And then 2 weeks later, on July the 21st, we had more issues, reports of other issues on the Tube network, at Warren Street. And there were other alleged bombers involved in that. Let me just bring in an image. I'm sure you'll be reminded of these people. There was a lot of, it was very visual, very much for the media. Two of these guys were arrested, coming out of their flat, hands up, with their tops off. And they received prison sentences for conspiracy to murder, 42 years. And it went on for a rather long period of time, and it was extremely painful for many people. London was in absolute fear. This woman, she actually talks about in the Netflix documentary how, when one situation happens, like a 7/7, you get copycat attacks, which inspire others. And all the other so-called attacks that happened afterwards were all failed attacks. Every one of the alleged bombs failed to detonate. But it, for Netflix, the story kind of leaps. It kind of leaps from 7/7 to chasing all these other bombers and the impact it had on London. So again, I feel that the title itself is misleading, but the title is supposed to grab you. It's supposed to pull you in. That is the aim of it. It's just clickbait, really. And I think that for good police, this would have been a horrible period of time. There are good police, there are still good police, but there are also bent cops. We know that as well. Then, of course, there was the situation, the unlawful murder of a completely innocent man, a completely innocent man on the say so of a woman who was trained by common purpose. And that completely innocent man was Jean Charles de Menezes. And he was a Brazilian electrician, poor lad, gunned down mercilessly on the tube, unlawful killing. Nobody has ever been held to account for it. The men involved in his murder, at the behest of Cressida Dick, who gave the go ahead and actually eventually became commissioner, eventually became the top cop. And she gave the go ahead to murder a completely innocent man in cold blood. And why? Why indeed? Because we were told they had confused him with this man. And this man is somebody, Hussein Osman, who had been on the tube in Stockwell with a man on the 21st of July. And apparently Hussein Osman had attempted to detonate a bomb And the man who was involved was Angus Campbell. He said it was 12:31 on the Northern Line. There was a mother with a baby, but there were also issues about who it actually was, because some people believed it was a man called Ramzi Mohammed. So there was some confusion about whether the guy was, anyway, whatever happened, the guy got away. He ran out the tube station. I think it was at Oval. And what Angus Campbell told us was that he saw that there was something of a bang that created smoke. There was remnants of a rucksack. And that the person, be that Ramzi Mohammed or Hussein Osman, said, "This is wrong. You're all wrong. This is wrong." And on the floor, there was a mass of yellow foam popping and fizzing, which we were told was the piperin. And Angus Campbell said he could see nuts and bolts. And what happened was the following day, they believed that this same man then went in to Stockwell Tube, and they actually, but you can see they look nothing alike. These men are completely different culture. And Ramzi Mohammed, who was also the other one, interchangeably that they confused with John Charles, again, was not a Brazilian and didn't look anything like him at all. And so what happened was, as I say, on the say so of Cressida Dick, common purpose trained, and we will do something about common purpose moving forward. I have before. The absolute brilliant, the most brilliant person who's ever looked into common purpose is Brian Gerrish, and I've covered it with him in detail. But I will cover common purpose up to date and its infiltration into British life. But the woman who gave the go ahead for the murder of this poor innocent man, was then awarded the top spot, the Chief Police of England and Wales. So that, in many respects, is what we see in the Netflix doc. We see what happens with poor Jean Charles. That the cause of death was ruled gunshots to the head, and because he was mistakenly identified as one of the fugitives from the previous day's failed bombing, and the police said that he had odd behavior, and that they just heard down their earpieces, "Yes, it's him." The order was given. They ran down the tube and they ended that man's life. They ended that man's life, multiple shots to the back of his head. And that was it. That was it. And of course, Cressida Dick, she wasn't involved in. Not of course, she Cressida Dick was not involved in being interviewed for this. In fact, no cops were, which was interesting. It was primarily Secret Services and the former British Prime Minister, who was Tony Blair at the time. So that essentially is the story that is told by Netflix. So, as you can see, it is absolutely the official narrative from start to finish. And I was recently, so actually, before I get to this, so just to say, there are obviously alternative versions. Let me have a glug. And big alternative versions, big alternative versions. So Netflix 100% is absolutely the establishment version of 7/7. And again, no disrespect to any victims of 7/7, which may or may not actually include the four men that people believe were the bombers, right? Because I dare to say that sort of stuff around here. You won't get that on mainstream media. And I only say that after years of research, years of research. I do not trot out official narratives. If a narrative is official, it already needs to be subject to scrutiny. So the other person who had really looked into this in great detail and whose work I have looked at is Dr. Nick Colostrom. Now, you may have heard of him. Certainly, he's been demonized by the British establishment. He's often referred to as a Holocaust denier, which he refutes. But he wrote the book Behind the Veil of 7/7, an investigation. And he's going on facts and evidence. And his version is absolutely a parallel version, excuse me. Um, and that's available in paperback. I don't know if it's available in hardback. But what he's previously said and what he says in that is that the men accused of the attack had not carried out the attack. And Dr. Colostrom found many uh, quite serious issues with the official narrative, including the issue of them getting on the train at Luton, including the fact that there were no post-mortems of any of the victims of 7/7. And including the fact that the police actually ended up having to correct the official narrative as they went, including to do with the fact that the train that they claimed had left had not left. It was a delayed train, and so the imagery that was put out of the four men at Luton Station was somehow falsified. And Dr. Colostrom has gone into this in some detail. He's had a number of editions of this book. I highly recommend it. And what he tackles is something that I think really needs to be tackled around this, and that is there really a war on terror, or is it, as he proposes, or is it the state itself terrorizing us? Well, many people question a number of these uh, te- uh, terrorist attacks, including the one at Manchester Arena, and with good reason. And we all saw what happened to Richard D. Hall when he questioned it, but it wasn't the questioning of it that was the problem. They managed to get him on a civil claim. They accused him of harassment, of which he lost his case in the High Court. So there's been a number of people who have called these events false flag and set up by the state. I am far from alone in um, raising awareness of this, far from alone. I find Nick Colostrom's version of events far more compelling than the Netflix version. I think that what it is in some respects is it clearly shows that the UK, the US, and the Israeli secret services coming together, as he says, and he shows so much of the fabricated evidence that they brought into play. He's absolutely right. There was information that he talked about. I had no idea, but it's really interesting because one of the things that I discovered through Dr. Colostrom was on the morning of 7/7, Rudy Giuliani, who was the mayor of New York when 9/11 happened, Rudy Giuliani had just flown into London. Isn't that extraordinary that the mayor of New York when 9/11 happened, and then what appeared to be some kind of quote unquote copycat attack, i.e., widespread terrorism, and Mayor Giuliani is around again as well. I find that interesting. I do. And the thing with Nick Colostrom is he talks a lot about fake terror. And again, it's very interesting. He says politicians want you to live in fear. And it's terrifying, but it's true. They do. And he talks about how questioning this narrative has got him into a lot of trouble. Well, we know that the moment that you dare to stand up and say, I don't think this all stacks up about official narratives, they come after you. They come after you. But I think that, and one of the things that he talks about, I think one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that still exists to suggest that this was a false flag attack is that, like 9/11, which was running a terror drill at the same time as 9/11 happened, that also happened in 7/7. And not just anywhere, but at the exact stations where the bombings were said to occur. So let us look at this. I want to play you, first of all, a recording. This is Peter Power. Peter Power was running a crisis management. Peter Power was a man with history working within the British establishment, in the police, in a kind of adjacent to secret services. He had a history. He formed a crisis management company, and his job was to apparently conduct these terror drills in different places in the event of a terror attack. Now, also, please do bear in mind that what I'm going to play you now, and I think it's really interesting, is um, Peter Power is offering up this information completely unsolicited. And he went on during the day to offer up this information. So, this, first of all, was Peter Power giving an interview on Radio 5 Live. Let me just get this. Here he is. And listen to what he has to say. It's interesting.
At 9:30 this morning, we were actually running an exercise for over a company of 1,000 people in London based on simultaneous bombs going off precisely at the railway stations that happened this morning. So I still have the hairs on the back of my neck standing upright.
To get this quite straight, you were running an exercise to see how you would cope with this, and it happened while you were running the exercise?
Precisely. And it was about 9:30 this morning. We planned this for a company, and for obvious reasons I don't want to reveal their name, but if they're listening, they'll know it.
So just to follow that on, he said that he was running a drill at precisely the same stations at the same time as the attacks took place. He then, and these were unsolicited comment, which I will discuss in a short while why they might have been unsolicited. He then followed that with an interview on ITV on the same day.
Bearing in mind I'm now in the private sector, and we sat everybody down in the city, 1,000 people involved in the whole organisation, but the crisis team. And the most peculiar thing was we based our scenario on the simultaneous attacks on the Underground and mainline station. So we had to suddenly switch an exercise from fictional to real. And one of the first things is get that bureau number. When you have a list of people missing, tell them. And it took a long time.
Just to get this right, you were actually working today on an exercise that envisioned virtually this scenario.
Almost precisely. I was up until 2 o'clock this morning because it's our job, my own company, Advisor Consultants. We specialise in helping people to get their crisis management response. How do you jump from slow time thinking to quick time doing? And we chose a scenario with their assistance, which is based on a terrorist attack because they're very close to a property occupied by Jewish businessmen. They're in the city, and there are more American banks in the city than there are in the whole of New York. A logical thing to do. And I've still got the...
I was going to say, how extraordinary today must feel for you.
How extraordinary indeed. Even the compromised hacks on legacy media could not take in the fact that this man was telling them that he had been conducting a training exercise at precisely the same time at precisely the same stations. Come on now, that beggars belief. What is the chances of that actually happening? There are 272 tube stations in London. What are the chances that he was conducting an exercise at the 3 stations that were involved in 7/7? And I believe that still remains one of the most compelling pieces of evidence to suggest it was a false flag attack. In the intervening years, Peter Power has taken this very, very badly indeed. He's offered at various stages to attempt to sort of confirm what he's been saying. He was once doorstepped by We Are Change UK. He lost his rag about that, and they were absolutely right to doorstep him. And that was when he came out, because up to that point, he wouldn't tell us who he was apparently running these exercises for. And eventually, let me just come up to this. So when he was doorstepped by We Are Change, he ended up saying that there has been much nonsense written about why my company ran an exercise on 7th of July 2007 that had very close parallels to the real thing that day. They were beyond close, mate. They were beyond close. And since then, I've made several attempts to add my own comments to numerous sites that seem to get increasingly excited about their own conspiracy theories. Yeah, but the thing is, you will know, Peter, with your background, and not just that he's listening to this, but with his background, he will know that when it comes to evidence, something like this is not something that you would dismiss as evidence. It's too compelling. So he might want to dismiss it as conspiracy theories, but I certainly, as an investigative journalist, I say it's absolutely compelling that he was running tandem exercises at exactly the same time and exactly the same stations. And we later found out it was for Reed Elsevier, which is an organization very famous, specializes in information. And employs 1,000 people. It also publishes as well. It's a publisher. Other researchers have said that the exercise was planned to be a tabletop exercise, a walkthrough, but that's not entirely clear. And what Peter Power was trying to say was that, central London, there was only so many train stations to choose from. Absolute bunkum. As I said, in the tube network, at the last count, 272, and I think they've added more, haven't they, like the Elizabeth line and everything. So rather a lot of train stations to choose from if you're running a training exercise, but for it to be the exact same ones at the same time, I struggle with that. I really struggle with that, and I think everybody should. I was approached a little while ago by somebody who's been on Wake Up with me before, and she suggested I talk to a man called Paul Blanchard. Have you heard of Paul Blanchard? Let me bring him in. Let me bring in his imagery so you can acquaint yourself if you are not acquainted. I suspect today's show might go on a little bit longer. That's the way it goes sometimes, yo. This is an image of, where is he? Where are you? Where are you, fella? Can't find you. I probably will soon, no doubt. Well, if I don't, I don't. Let me just have a look here on the. No. Oh, do beg pardon. There he is, Paul Blanchard. So I spoke to Paul Blanchard, a retired accountant. I spoke with him. His story for a period of time was over mainstream media about he claimed to have given a fax to security services in 2004, naming both Mohammed Siddiqui Khan and Shehzad Tanweer. And he explained how he believed these security services had either failed to investigate or ignored his tip. He said, someone has to answer to this. If they had followed up my intel, the attacks may not have happened. Paul claims that he came across this information while he was working for Spanish security services. He said he'd been profiling a man we suspected of terror links, had found out some of his associates, friends, and contacts, which included Khan and Tanweer. Said he didn't know them from Adam, but knew that they should have been monitored. So he listed them as known associates. He said he handed it to what was then known as Special Branch, who said they had passed it to the security services, and that was 12 months before the attack. Now, if that is the case, then that plays into the other narrative, and that is the secret services not only knew, which we now know they did know because these guys were on their radar, apparently, not only knew. So there's a number of narratives that are potential, right? But it could well be that according to Paul's narrative, the secret services knew what was likely to happen and they allowed it. Now, that is not unheard of. The thing about false flag attacks, the thing about psyops is it doesn't mean the thing hasn't happened, but it could mean that it's either instigated by the state, or the state have done nothing to stop it and have used it for their own agendas. And we know this whole idea, the war on terror, and where it's coming from now, it is becoming absolutely increasingly evident. I didn't realize this back in 2005 when all this happened. I was like, this is horrendous what's happened. But bit by bit, a lot of the story didn't make sense to me. Now, just imagine, suspend your disbelief for a moment. If you are of the mind that the official narrative is absolutely accurate and correct, imagine if it isn't. That's 4 males who somehow went to their death. Some people believe that those males were involved with the training exercise and only believed they were doing a training exercise. Other people believe that those males weren't there at all. Other people believe those males don't exist. And other people believe that those males were set up. Now, I don't know where you stand on that. I'm going to take some comments from the live chat, actually. Let's see. Yes, that's true, NCP. Yeah, and in fact, one of the David Shayler and Annie, they are both former Secret Service agents. And Nick Colostrom had talked with David Shayler before. And I mean, the thing is disintegral. It's interesting. Did anyone see the bodies? Well, what I found interesting about the Netflix version, of course, was that there were only two survivors who were in the entire 4-part series, which I thought was interesting. No fun times forever. The official narrative does not add up. And the problem is what happens is the moment you question it, you have bad faith actors who are like, you're questioning this. What about all the victims? No. I'm not saying for a second that there were not victims at 7/7. I am saying that it appeared all incredibly convenient for everything that has followed since. Incredibly convenient. And I should say about Paul Blanchard, I don't know how legit he is. We arranged for him to come on the show twice. He backed out twice, citing legal reasons. That may be true or not. I do know that he has criminal convictions for separate fraud offences in 2006, which he's fighting. But that doesn't mean that he's lying about this. He has documents and he is fighting to clear his name. Either way, it is another potential thread to add to the idea that the secret services did indeed know what was going to happen and they allowed it to happen. And why is a question. To conclude, And to be very, very clear about this, the Netflix version is absolutely the British establishment at its finest in all its glossy production colour. Wonderful, fabulous, fabulous production. Is it true? Who knows? But my conclusion is simple. Yes, of course, 7/7 happened. Okay, there was carnage, there was panic, there was trauma, and there were victims. Of that, I'm fairly certain. May they all rest in peace. And for those who remain, may they also find peace. I don't believe the official narrative. It does not add up. But what I do know is at the time, it created an absolute state of terror in London. People were walking the streets of London like zombies with pictures of missing loved ones. It was catastrophic. It was heartbreaking. There were so many innocents out there. But the question is, did that also include the men who we believe did it in the first place? It was an absolutely terrifying time for Londoners. People sought to leave London as quickly as they could. They were worried that another attack would take place. The whole of July 2005 was ramped up. War on terror, war on terror. And do I think that people can become so radicalized as to commit atrocities? Yes, absolutely, I do. Do I think this was one? I'm not convinced. The official narrative, as I say, absolutely does not stand up to scrutiny. Rich D. Hall has also done some sterling work into this. It is almost certainly a false flag. It came after 9/11. The world was already primed for another Muslim attack. The big difference is who was involved and who was really behind it. And I wonder if we are ever going to find out the truth about both 9/11 and 7/7. I wanted to talk about that today. So there you go. It's time to wake up with Sonia Poulton.